Hello and welcome to Politics Today. In this programme today, we'll be discussing the recent G7 summit that Britain hosted in Cornwall. And we'll say, is this a success of Brexit, that so many of our world leaders gathered together in our nation to deal with some of the global problems the world is facing, particularly in light of the global pandemic, COVID-19. So to ask all these important questions, I'm joined today by David Hughes for Prayer for Parliament and Melanie Simmons, editor of the Heart newspaper, which you will love and know very well. I'll start off with you, David. It's great to see you back in the studio. I think it was a few months ago you were on the home edition of Politics Today. You've been through some battles yourself, so we're so pleased that you've overcome these health battles.
Thank you.
And what is your perspective as we look at the G7 summit that took place in Cornwall? The fact that, it's a bit of a strange county to choose, Cornwall, to host the world leaders when we know the infrastructure is not as it should be compared to the rest of the country.
I think it's helped us. We've been obviously praying for the government and praying over Europe, even since Brexit was accepted. But one of the things is that this has brought out is that we still need to keep prayer cover going because Europe hasn't changed. Europe is still trying to drag us back into Europe. They're giving us a lot of flack. And I think the whole thing about what was going on is just exposing a lot of stuff that's been hidden in darkness. I do think that we saw, hopefully, a more of a cementing between the alliance between Britain and America, which has always been there. And it was good to see that the Prime Minister and Carrie looked more relaxed. I think she's sort of softened since having the baby and getting married.
And I think that's an interesting observation on that one, David. Melanie, it's great to have you back on the programme. I'm kind of a resident journalist on this programme as well. That's why I value your views and your opinions. So, when we're looking at the G7, I think what is so significant here, particularly from a kind of British perspective, is that this is the first major global summit that has been held in over a year because of COVID-19. The fact that Britain has the leadership of the G7 this year meant that we could really show the benefits of Brexit and being out of the European Union, but also showing our strength as a global player. But are you concerned about the pandering to Joe Biden by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in which he also brought out the Queen and the royal family in order to woo the new American administration and showing off his so-called liberal credentials?
Well, I think perhaps it wasn't so much the Americans, just as all of them. It was a display. I think there is a lot of unity, and this is particularly shown in the New Atlantic Charter, which was produced on June the 10th, the day before. And it's easy to find. It's on the British government and the White House site. And they've actually got everything done and dusted. Though the Atlantic Charter was produced in just after the Second World War and is supposed to be the way ahead for the liberal democracies after that and after all the trauma of the Second World War, and particularly Britain and America. And they've actually, they've revamped it. And there are some quite concerning things in it. There are 8 points. And let me give you the sixth. We commit to continue building an inclusive, fair, climate-friendly, sustainable, rules-based global economy for the 21st century. Global economy. We will strengthen financial stability and transparency, fight corruption and illicit finance, I wonder who they're referring to, and innovate and compete through high labour and environmental standards, which all sounds rather expensive, doesn't it? So then it says, 7th, the world has reached a critical point where it must act urgently and ambitiously to tackle the climate crisis, protect biodiversity and sustain nature. What particularly, the last bit, 8th, is about the catastrophic impact of health crises. We've just had one, apparently, and they know presumably what's coming down the line. What particularly concerns me, though, is the 3rd point. We remain united behind the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. We oppose interference through disinformation or other malign influences, including in elections, and confirm our commitment to debt transparency, sustainability, and sound governance of debt relief. So if they're going to oppose interference through disinformation, what disinformation? Who decides what the disinformation is? There's nothing here about free speech. There's nothing here about the values which underpinned our liberal democracies. These are all the seeds of totalitarianism. So this is what I'm really I'm concerned about.
I think rightly so, Melanie, to be concerned about, because what we saw with the G7 summit was that now there are problems that the world is facing, but they need global solutions. The answer is not kind of national sovereign states answering some of these problems, but now we have to deal with these subjects on a global level. And David, we've just also, as the recording of this program today, also seen that Israel has a new prime minister in Naftali Bennett, the Benjamin Netanyahu's 12 years of being in power in Israel. He's gone. We've seen that Trump has also gone. And what concerns me the most now is that there are no leaders in the West with any moral clarity whatsoever. And it seems that our new leaders that have emerged are very much have this very liberal, green agenda that they're pursuing. But this won't meet the challenges of dealing with a resurgent Iran or with China or with Russia. And as Manley said in this charter, there's no discussion on exporting religious freedom, exporting democracy, which underpin the world order as it was created after the Second World War.
I don't think the situation in Israel is going to last because it's such a minor, I think the majority is won. It'll all crumble again, so who knows what's going to happen. But we're getting towards the end times. I mean, there's a big change going on. Quite a few prophecies around, saying that, there's a lot of wrath around the corner and there's going to be a shake-up. Personally, the sooner it can come, the better, because nobody seems to be taking into account that the Lord is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Certainly the government don't seem to be taking any notice. They think it's all scientific. And we're getting a bit threadbare of that. But intercession, we just got to keep up the intercession and keep going.
Absolutely. And also what concerned a lot of political commentators this week in covering the G7 summit was Boris's reference to Build Back Better and Build Back Greener. And the other thing he says as well here is to, where it says, I forgot this one, that he wants to build back fairer and more equal, which is very confusing mantra and rhetoric from a supposedly conservative prime minister that backed Brexit, that backs nationalism, and now he seems to be, speaking from a platform of promoting kind of very liberal wokeism.
Yes, I don't feel that they're a Tory party anymore, and that's why we've still got the backbenchers getting very concerned. But the trouble is, while Labour is supporting the government in its current measures and postponement of Freedom Day, there isn't much chance of it changing. I mean, our current parliament seems to be like a sort of Duma, just rubber stamping the leader's wishes. And as you pointed out, Simon, last week's Sunday Times magazine had a big feature on how the Greens are more or less taking over Downing Street. I don't recognise it as a Tory party anymore. I mean, you get the diehards or the traditional Tories like Sir Ian Duncan Smith turning up on talk radio, not on Radio 4 to give a balancing point of view. Radio 4 has all the people who are supposed to, to toe the line. You get the people, the traditional people, on alternative platforms now. So yes, there is a huge concern because I think there's been a regime change in the last just over a year or more, which we haven't really noticed. But I think the government has taken many powers upon itself, and I don't know if we'll ever get them back again. And of course, an event like this, the G7, it's really them all coming together, dancing to a sort of pre-agreed tune, and there aren't the personalities that you'd have had, say, I don't know, a few decades ago. I mean, I look back at the picture from San Remo, 1922. You look at Lloyd George, you look at the American Roosevelt. They're strong personalities, and they embodied their countries. They all look the same now.
Yeah, no, it's very true. You know, David, you very much with prayer for Parliament, pray for the government, pray for our institutions, very much praying in that kind of battle for Brexit. But one thing concerns me the most is that out of Boris Johnson's lips is almost a kind of promotion of globalism and global solutions, and we need to find global answers to these problems. And almost bringing the world into, certainly democracies of the world, into a closer union. But what that concerns us is that, does that mean that Brexit's worthless? Because if we have a prime minister that's pulled ourselves out of the European Union on one hand, and the next hand, he's very much happy to endorse the mantra of the World Economic Forum with this global reset and build back better mantra, means that essentially he's allowing our government and our nation to move closer towards world government.
I think we're hearing two stories because we are very much aware that the media say what they want to say and do not say what they don't want to say. Now, I've listened and we, with my team, have been following a chap named Jeff Taylor. He stands for independence, and he was standing up very strongly, commentating on politics and independence for Brexit. And he's had some observations from the G7. Now, on the G7, he said that basically at the end, he has it on authority that Boris Johnson said to Biden that with great respect, basically keep out of Brexit while we get on with the talks. I think we're fortunate having Lord David Frost standing up for negotiating the talks. But the other thing is with Macron and Ursula basically doing their bit, one of the things that shocked us, and again this was hearsay but from Taylor, basically that Boris Johnson, in a conversation with Macron, because he did have a one-to-one with Macron, basically said to him, if they stopped letting sausages from Toulouse be sold in Paris, what would you be saying? He said, well, that's no comparison because Paris and Toulouse are in the same country. And Boris said to him, that's it. Northern Ireland is part of Great Britain. And Macron did not know that Northern Ireland was part of Great Britain. And that shocked Boris. I mean, it shocked, and I mean, it seems beyond compare, but that's what I understand, that Macron did not know that Northern Ireland was part of Great Britain. I mean, it's beyond thought. But if that sort of thing has been sent around and the EU are all doing this, that and the other, Biden's then going to start listening to them as well. So we've got a spiritual battle on our hands, which we had to stand in the gap and let the Lord sort it all out.
No, definitely, and it is quite a mess. I want to go back, Manly, just a little bit to what you said, and I was very struck by this Sunday Times magazine, which says the Green Party, how Carrie Johnson and friends are rewilding the Tories. And we can see that you know, she recently married Boris and is now Mrs. Johnson. But her agenda, though, she's now effectively controlling Downing Street, she's controlling the government, and she's pushing not only these woke ideas, but also these green ideas. Yes, we all have to take care of the environment, that's important, but this is this obsession with implementing green policies that will effectively destroy our economy and using it as a means to stop travel that we're all used to. And of course, anyone that has seen anything written or heard from the World Economic Forum, this is the next thing on the international agenda after COVID-19 is the green agenda in the next 10 years, which means it will limit our ability to drive, our ability to fly, and will massively have an impact on our own kind of personal kind of income and wealth. And it's this green obsession that is quite frightening and will be used as a pretext in order to bring the world closer towards globalism.
Yes.
Are you concerned now, particularly now that she has the full grasp of the party? And do you think that Boris Johnson will now pay a political price at the polls in the future as we head into a general election? Or has everything kind of been masked by COVID-19 and that no one else is talking about anything else other than the pandemic and vaccinations and our Freedom Day.
Well, I think that the people who've been hurt in all of this last year are the Tory voters more. They're the people who have their own businesses who've just seen them going to the wall. I mean, I was just listening on LBC on the way here, one man saying he had a business supplying events, all the electrics and all the rest, big stuff, big events. And he'd had to sell his house in the last year to keep the business going. And now we actually know that is sadly one of the declared aims of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset concept, which we have featured in Heart newspaper earlier this year. And there is this idea, but they're now even talking about a universal basic income, which is, I couldn't believe it, but that was being talked about on talk radio, I think, the other day. It's now being floated. So you get everyone to lose their business, come down to the same level. They're more easily controlled. They're completely dependent. You've got a generation of young millennials who can't buy a house. Never mind bank of mum and dad, that wouldn't barely even give them a deposit. And so there's a lot of people who have now been made dependent on the state. And therefore, they won't necessarily be in a position to argue. So whether Boris suffers at the polls, I suspect not, because the alternative isn't better. I mean, you might get, it won't be the Tory voters who desert Boris. It might be the Red Wall people who vote him into power in December 2019. But as for the Green agenda, I mean, it's... whatever I say will be very politically incorrect, because God promises he'll bring a new heaven and a new earth. And it's all in the book of Revelation. We'll have all these natural disasters, which they will put down to climate change because we use too many aerosols, but it's actually the Lord trying to bring people to repentance and make them desperate.
One of the things I would say is I'm reminded of which I've mentioned on this programme before, that when Boris came in the last election, there was a prophetic word saying that Boris wouldn't have a long term personally. And also the Conservatives are very good at getting rid of their Prime Minister or leader while in office. So who's to know that there may be a different new leader before the next general election? And maybe they get
a proper Tory.
Maybe this is the part of following the road down.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's extraordinary what we're actually going through right now. A year and a half of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now we're having our G7 global leaders actually talking about a need for greater globalization. We're having the EU moving to, the United Nations, also pushing these globalist agendas like no borders, open immigration. There's even a suggestion that they want to do a digital ID where every citizen on the planet has their own digital ID. It's been pushed forward by Microsoft and the Rockefeller Foundation, and these are easy to find. I mean, all before this stuff was in the darkness, but now seems very much in the light, and it seems that our nations now are crumbling and pushing towards a world government, but at the same time we have the likes of Russia that are not playing ball. China's wanting to dominate this, and we have an extremely weak president in the United States in Biden, and it looks very clear that he's not actually running the show. So are you concerned that there isn't enough media scrutiny on some of these big issues, particularly when it comes to our broadcast media, that it's let's just focus on the pandemic and not look at anything else, and so therefore these big news stories just get buried?
Yes, completely. I mean, the debate has completely shrunk, really. I haven't heard about the New Atlantic Charter on the mainstream media. I saw it on an alternative one, on UK Column, and they printed out all sorts of alternative stuff which doesn't get into the media. Debate has been shut down. And, we've got in the Atlantic Charter about disinformation. So very concerned the big issues are not being covered. There is really, debate is almost being stifled. I mean, the BBC admits it will not discuss vaccines openly. It simply won't. It won't entertain an alternative view. And that's all going out in the alternative media, which, we've printed that in this latest paper. But the good news, though, is that had the privilege of talking to Brenda Taylor last night, who's been very involved in prayer leading up to the G7, as you have, David, and prayer groups around the country. Lydia, what's it called? Global Watch is an American one. There are these Friday afternoon Zoom meetings, which are very good, and because, as we know, there's a bit of a dearth of leadership in the church at the moment. And what they reckon is, and I'm trying to go and summarise this, Genesis 11, Tower of Babel, the analogy is that they all said, right, we're going to build together, leave God out, and God looked down and said they're going to be unstoppable if we let them get away with this. So then in Genesis 12, you've got God's reset, his plan. He brings in Abraham and creates a great nation, a priestly nation, and he scatters that. So they reckon through the prayer that's gone on, there has been a divine restraining order put on this globalist agenda because it's too early, it's not quite the time. We know what it is now. The stall is set out. The non-Christians know it. Some of the sort of Glastonbury type people, they're more clued up than a lot of Christians are. They know it all. But by the grace of God, we might have an extension of time now, because Brenda made a very good point that with the current church, we're not ready to be raptured. No. I mean, I look around and I said, if I was God, I would not have raptured this lot. We've got to be sort of lean, mean, fighting machine. We've got to be doing the stuff, really doing the Mark 16 stuff, making disciples, baptising. And there will be persecution. I'll do a quick show of the paper. We've got an article in the new paper, God's roadmap out of this mess. The Lord gave me the headline. I didn't know what the story was going to be. And then I heard a very good message at church from Lance Lambert's 2011 prophecy. Seemed very appropriate for now. And there's an article on persecution in here because Keith Malcolmson, who wrote on Bible prophecy, the last issue, has been very popular. He was actually led to write for this issue about persecution, getting ready, drawing lessons from our brothers and sisters in China, where there's estimated to be 60 million pastors in hiding, and they've just gone off grid. And I think a lot of us had to prepare in the same way, but really to become ready as a body of people and to trust God that if there's this restraining order which has been put out in the spiritual terms, there is now going to be a window, the Lord will pour out his spirit and...
Yeah, but didn't we have that window of opportunity when President Trump was in power? But the fact that his administration put a pause on the whole movement towards globalism.
Yes.
That's why all the other when he was president, there was this massive awkwardness with other world leaders around Trump because he wasn't playing ball in terms of their globalist agenda. But now we have Biden who is accelerating this global agenda. And the difference is between then and now, I think, is the fact that the Trump administration tried to implement a kind of biblical worldview in terms of its policies from top down, but it had no real impact on the grassroots amongst Americans. So haven't we passed the point of no return now? I feel potentially that we have now, that God has given the nations so many opportunities, particularly the Western nations, and now we are running out. And what we're seeing in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic is the global infrastructure being built for the Antichrist.
Yes, but by the grace of God, it's all out in plain sight now for those who've got eyes to see and ears to hear. And we can see the agenda. And so as believers, we know what we have to do. One of my concerns during Trump's time, and Mike Evans of Jerusalem Prayer Team picked this up, it was the idolising of Trump, sadly. So Christians were having quite an easy time of it. They were accepted. They were they were the head, not the tail. And as we see from the church in China, they really grow when there's a bit of persecution, which we're going to see under President Biden, or rather not the closing out from public life, which we see quite a lot in this country already. So that was the concern when Trump was in power. There was an idolising of him. And Mike Evans said, I've seen pastors almost drunk with power because they're sort of accepted at the top table. That was the big danger. And so the party didn't last. Whether he comes back or not, we don't, or his son does in 2024, we don't know. But I think by God's grace, under Biden, the American church are going to really have to sort of shape up and know what it's like for the first time, not to be a bit more pariah-like.
Well, they tasted this with Obama, but it's only a question of time before Kamala Harris actually takes over. And then we're going to see another persecution. So, I mean, which leads us on, David, to...
I think the time, just quickly, was that we got so engrossed with what the prophets were saying that we was basically doing a battle and not hearing totally from God.
Yeah, which I think is where we are now. So it almost seems as if the nations now are imploding inwards. That the problems that the nations in the West and the world are facing are far bigger than any government can actually handle and deal with. And this is why they're looking towards globalism as an answer. But as we bring this program to a close, David, as a Christian and certainly as an intercessor you are, how do we pray at this time, knowing I think that our nations have actually gone past the point of no return? That I don't think there is a chance now for our nations to return back to God as they once were. And we saw that with the states they tried. But with the Democrats in power, that looks completely unlikely. And are we now entering a new period of persecution for Christians in the West as the nations move further into kind of globalist institutions?
Well, we're already seeing persecution of Christians in Britain and other places, things that you wouldn't have believed were going to happen 10, 20 years ago. What I think we're finding with our group, we've actually, our group is slightly smaller nowadays and more united. And when we have our Zoom intercession meetings, we basically have a period of silence where we listen out for what the Lord's saying. And we do find that actually most of us get a bit of the jigsaw puzzle, and when we sort of half an hour later say, now what's everybody getting? It comes together as the full picture. And I think you've got to get together with other intercessors, listen, see what the Lord's saying, get the whole picture. We're finding it's taken us to a new level, and then we intercede and we pray down those lines. And it is like what we were doing a year ago is totally different from what we're doing now. And we've just got to rely on that, because without him, there's nothing.
And Melanie, with your Heart newspaper as well, you're very much a kind of a watchman on the wall. So within 30 seconds, how vital is it that Christians pray and intercede and understand God's will, not only for our nation, but also for the West as well, because we're in peril?
It's very important, and that's one of the concerns, that prayer's been shut down so much this year. But one of the findings recently, during the intercession from Global Watch, was the Lord was calling intercessor to come up to the level of a watchman who has the authority to open or close the city gates. And I think that's a very interesting key.
Excellent. David and Melanie, thank you so much for being my guests on Politics Today as we discuss the issues surrounding the G7 summit that Britain hosted in Cornwall. And I want to thank you for watching this programme today. As Christians, it's vital that we are praying and interceding for our nation, because our nations are in peril and we need to stand up. So thank you for watching this edition